I want to start with a little story. I'd sent out the form for all of you guys to fill, and I got back a few interesting questions, and I got to know a little bit about what you guys want me to talk about. And one of the most interesting questions I got was, I'll read it out to you. It said, "Don't be proud of your college. Make your college proud to have you." Is this possible? This is in quotes. This is one of the answers I wrote on Quora a while ago, and the person who asked this question says, "Is this possible in an Indian college?" Contrary to your Quora answer, guys with less or absolutely no experience in competitive programming were amongst the best to get an internship at companies like Amazon and Microsoft, along with the best coders. Am I missing something? So this is the whole question. And so let me tell you a story about a little bit about this. When I was, I'm a master student in college now. I'm finishing off, and I'll tell you more about that later. But when I was in my second year, we had this big class, very important class at Cornell called 3110. It's a class on functional programming. It's one of the hardest CS classes that we have to take. And we work in groups for the programming assignments. And so I was working in a group of four people. There was me. There was this Chinese guy who was a good friend of mine. There was a Chinese girl who was also a good friend of mine, and then there was also a white girl. And this was our group of four. And what happened is, as we started working together, we realized soon enough that how good each other was. And so we kind of assign tasks and collaborate together. And we realized very soon that me, the Chinese guy, and the Chinese girl were really getting our work done. We were doing everything perfectly. We were doing really well. But it seemed like the white girl wasn't really contributing, and which happens all the time, right? In collaborative projects, there's always people who um, lag behind. So one would expect, next year, when we were all interviewing for our internships, one would expect that the people who do the best in programming assignments or programming in general will get the best internships, right? Uh, so when next summer did come around, it turned out that I was lucky. I got Google. Um, the Chinese guy was not so lucky. He was probably better than me, I would say, as a coder at that point. And but he was just a bad interviewer, so he didn't get any company. He didn't get an internship in a second year, which is fine. He didn't get an internship. The Chinese girl um, did get an internship, but she worked at some data analytics firm in Philadelphia. It wasn't a great internship. It was a decent company, but it wasn't great. But what'll blow your mind is the white girl we were with. She got into WhatsApp. She worked at WhatsApp that year, and it was incredible because having worked with her, we realized that that she clearly does not have the same kind of skills you need to write any code. So the moral, I guess, of this little story is, I often will say something on maybe on Quora, or if anyone asks me for advice, I'll tell you that you know do competitive programming, and it might help you in your interviews, or do a lot of side projects. That'll definitely help in your interviews. And I'm not lying when I say those things. Those things are true. It's just that um, welcome to like a little thing called like life, right? In life, not everything is fair, and things like this happen all the time. And I just want to preface my talk with that to kind of give you more background about how things work in general. And all my advice should be taken with a grain of salt, and realize that it is the advice that I've learned from doing whatever I've done, but it's not always true because luck comes into play. Anyway, let me introduce myself one more time. I'm Debargo. I go by Didi, and let's talk about. I'll give you a little talk about what I'm going to talk about today. I sent you guys that form, and you guys all a lot of you responded. I got like 52 responses, and they were very interesting responses. I was kind of interesting to know what you guys are interested in and what you guys are not interested in. Um, and so I will talk about a little more about all of these things, or as much as I can touch on. I'll start with a little bit about me. I'll talk a little bit about working at a big company versus working at a small company. Um, I'll talk a little bit about what I call the Great Indian Dream, education here in America, and a little bit about like general life philosophy that I follow in day-to-day life that helps me um, live. And so let's start. Uh, a little bit about me. You guys picked me to give this talk, and I took some time out to give it, probably because of some of the things I've done, and I'm just going to walk you through briefly about kind of my background. So I was born in Kolkata in a long time ago, 1992, and I lived there for 3 years before I moved to San Jose in California. I lived in San Jose for 7 years. I went to elementary school here, and then after class five, I moved back to Kolkata, and I spent my middle school and high school in Kolkata, and then after I graduated from high school, I was fortunate enough to go to Cornell, and at Cornell is where all the interesting stuff started happening. My life was pretty average and normal up to then, but and I'll talk more about this later. College opened up a lot more opportunities for me to explore different things. And just briefly, as a freshman, I got the opportunity to work on a simulation for a project team. And that project team makes satellites, and that satellite was actually launching this year. So I got to work on writing a simulation for a satellite that's actually going to space, which is really, really cool. Um, and then I also worked on a phonetics project, a linguistics project called QuickTongue, where I made a tongue-controlled game. Somewhere in my first and second year, between my first and second year summer, I did a startup, I did some research, and I took some classes. It was a very stressful summer, yeah, worked really hard. Come second year, I started contributing to an open source project called Fabricator. I don't know how many of you have heard of Fabricator, but it's a open source software engineering tool that came out of Facebook. It's used for amongst many things, just writing code and doing code reviews and commenting and iteration on that. It's actually very widely used. It's used not only at Facebook but at places like Quora, Coursera, and just there's a whole list of companies that it's used at that are very, very famous, and that was great. After my second year, I got the big break at Google. Um, Google was an interesting experience, which I will tell you about later too. And around that time is when I got I wrote "Hacking the Indian Education System," which was my Quora blog post, which became really viral. It was about, in general, some of the stuff that I did to scrape the board results, and I wrote a blog post about that, and some newspapers covered me, so that was pretty cool. Third year, I did some robotics research. I was really working very hard with classes because I was graduating early. I got my bachelor's after my third year. This summer, this is right now, I'm at Coursera, um, and I spoke at TEDx in Bangalore a few weeks ago, and I'll go back to school next semester for one more semester, finish off my robotics research, get my master's degree, and after my master's, I will be working at Facebook in New York for a short amount of time. I know even from now that I'll be working there for a short amount of time, and after that, I'm considering doing a PhD or doing a startup. So enough about me. I want to talk to you about one of the most interesting things, actually, that I saw when I was reading your answers. It struck me as strange how out of all your answers, 63% of you wanted to know about working at Google. Not surprising, actually, but this is something that I found. 63% of you wanted to know about working at Google, but only 23% of you were interested at working at Coursera, which makes me a little sad because I worked at Coursera. I chose Coursera over Google for a reason, right? And I want to talk to you a little bit more about that reason and how it builds into kind of what I think about how the typical Indian mindset approaches these things. And this was me too. So I just want to let you know that I also thought in this way for the longest time. I just want to clarify something so you get a better picture of the industry in general. Um, so all over the world, one of the big reasons that people love Google is because Google is a great company. It does a lot of great things. It's a pretty good place to work. It's amazing. It's popular. It's amazing, right? The reason why I think Google is so in demand in India is just the fact that Google is a well-esteemed company, but because when I was in India and when I was a kid in high school, I would read um, articles online just like the ones that I put right here. There's numerous articles about, IITN gets such and such salary offer from Google. Google offers top salaries. Google offers crore packages and whatnot. And you hear this all the time, and you see like people posting about it, and it's just amazing that the response that people get when they get into Google, and which is understandable, and everyone loves Google, right? But Google is not all cherries and butterflies. It's actually it gets more complicated than that. There are a surprisingly large amount of things about Google that you don't see from the outside, that you can only see from the inside. Um, so to start off, there are pros. There are some big advantages to working at Google. Um, and I've named two of them. The perks at Google are honestly, even in a place like the Silicon Valley where perks are great in general, the perks at Google are amazing. They're everything from, I have a Quora answer about this, which I can link you to if you're interested later on. Um, and everything about Google is amazing, right? They offer you free cars to rent at work. They offer you slides at work and free food at work and bicycles for free to cycle around campus. They offer you a whole bunch of things. I can't list everything. I have written the Quora answer about it. So if you want to read more about it, definitely check it out. So perks, yes. And the other big thing is the brand name, right? Everyone recognizes Google. And once you work at Google, going to another place becomes so easy because everyone recognizes Google. And you see that most on sites like AngelList, right? AngelList is a site which lists startups and which lists where startups can list themselves and they look for employees. I think I read an article about how the two biggest things, the words that they look for, because you have a small description that you can put in your AngelList account, and the two biggest words were Stanford and Google that companies would look for when recruiting, which says something, right? Google has a huge brand presence. Um, but it's not all great. There's a lot of myths about Google that many people believe that aren't true. I'll go through some of them. So a lot of people believe that Google uh, pays the best. This is a bigger concern in India than America. Most people here don't really talk about salaries and stuff like the Indian media does, or like a lot of people in India tend to do. Um, but just for informational sake, just to get it across, I want to make it clear that Google does not pay the best. There are many companies, many startups and big companies that actually pay better than Google, which makes sense if you think about it, because Google has such a big brand name, they can afford. to not be the best in the pay department. They pay very well, but not the best. Um, Another big myth is that they have the best people. Um, they have very good people. They have some of the best people, yes. There are some great coders at Google, but you'll be surprised, and I can prove it to you in a bit, that their concentration of raw intelligence is not as good as some other companies, and I'll show you that in a bit. And the other thing is, people also believe that the typical sell that Google recruiters will say is, if you work at Google, you have a huge impact on the world. Um, you're probably not going to have a huge impact on the world on 90% of your teams at Google. Odds are that you'll be working on something that many people use but nobody notices. Um, there's teams dedicated to things in YouTube that you have probably never ever used in your life that very few people have used. And 90% of all the teams on Google work on things that you never see and that don't really make a big impact. But there are 10% of teams that do. So I'm just putting that out there. And another big myth, and which doesn't really matter to me, but it's not something you should also know, is because I don't know how they did it, but over the years they were very successful in gaining a reputation for having the hardest interviews. Maybe because the best people went there, but so I recently interviewed at Google for full time after my internship and a lot of other places, and let me tell you, they have far from the hardest interviews. They actually have quite normal interviews compared to other places. So just throwing that out there. Um, so I was kind of sad that all of you wanted to know about Google and not about Coursera, because after I interned at Google, they gave me an offer to come back full time and to come back and intern again. And I said no because despite all the perks, all those myths were revealed. And I said yes to Coursera. Uh, and I'll tell you about why. Uh, so at Coursera, at small startups in general, a lot of this is generalizable. Um, so the pay is equal, if not more. I don't want to talk about that much, but it's most companies in the Silicon Valley compare in pay to Google, at least at a starting point. So I'm putting that out there. Um, the people at Coursera, they're extremely smart people. In fact, they're so smart that I have a slide right after this just to show you what kind of people work at Coursera. Um, And the other thing is the impact you make is so much bigger because Coursera has a little over 100 employees. Google has 50,000 employees. So every engineer, even as an intern at Coursera, I've been working on a product that the whole company depends on. So it feels really good as an engineer to have my work actually make an impact. And that's a big issue for me because I don't. It's horrible when you work for months and months on end to know that you made one small little button on some big site. That's not a great feeling. Um, and I want to quote one of my professors at Cornell. So John Hopcroft is, if you haven't heard of his name, is one of our most famous professors at Cornell. He won the Turing Award, which I presume you know what that is. The Turing Award is the Nobel Prize for CS, as they say. And so he's a very eccentric person. He's a very funny person too. And we all asked him, all of us last year, when after we were deciding what job we should take, we sat with him and we asked him, Professor, uh, where do you think we should work? And he said something that really resonated in my mind. He said, it doesn't matter where, just pick a place where everybody around you is smarter than you. And I think that's the one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever been given. Um, it goes right in line with if you're surrounded by smart people, your inferiority that you will drive you to grow as an individual and as in whatever aspects that you're worse than them. And it's a great piece of advice, and I would also advise any of you listening to follow that. Um, and just a little more about stuff that I enjoyed at Coursera. Um, it's very socially driven. It's not one of those companies which is always about, how much money are we making, how much money are we making, how much money are we making. Uh, Coursera actually cares about education, and that's just a great thing to see. When you're working at a company which cares about a real issue, it feels really good, and that's why like I wake up every day very excited to go to work. Um, Another thing is, this is hard to explain, but when your company has 100 people, everyone becomes very close to you. You become like a family. You know everybody. You go in the mornings. You say hi to everybody. You sit for lunch with the whole company. It's great, and you're having lunch with such legendary individuals, and it's incredible. The kind of conversation you have, and the kind of connection you share with such people just feels really good. Every day is very exciting at Coursera because it's a small company. We move very fast, so every day you're writing big changes and we're deploying code to prod every day, and it's a much more fast than a company like Google. At Google, we would only deploy once a week, and at Coursera, we deploy multiple times a day. So the pace is much faster. Uh, Other things are, less politics, less hierarchy, less worrying about where your career future is. Um, we have happy hours twice a week, which means everyone in the company gets together to drink at work, twice a week. It's a lot of fun. We just go, we drink at work, have a lot of fun, play table tennis. It's great. There's unlimited holidays. There's no work hours. I can tell you more about this forever. Um, but I want to focus on the people at Coursera because this is the biggest reason that, given John Hopcroft's advice, this is the biggest reason that I chose Coursera. Uh, I'm just going to go through a list of great people, and I won't name all of them because their privacy is dear to me. Um, you probably know our two founders, which are the first two people on this list. There are two Stanford professors. One of them is the biggest guy in machine learning in the world, uh, arguably, obviously, but he started the Google Deep Brain project. He's extremely well known. His name is Andrew Ng. He's sorry, he's a complete legend. He's so smart and so humble. Then our other co-founder is a Stanford professor who is probably the biggest woman in machine learning. Her name is Daphne Koller. And just one example, because most of her work you wouldn't understand, I wouldn't understand. So just one example of how smart she is she got her master's when she was 18. So she's definitely a genius. And another really fascinating thing is I realized on my second day of work as an intern that one of the girls on my team uh, happens to be the top ranking IIT girl in history. That's that just struck me as amazing. Like I was sitting next to a girl who came second in her IIT, and that's the best a girl has done in history. Not to mention that she's a international chemistry or physics and something Olympiad medalist. She was just an insanely humble person and insanely smart. And it's just a privilege to work with somebody that's so talented. More than that, like 50% of the company is from Stanford. Stanford is the best computer science school in the world, almost undoubtedly. 25 of our percent of our engineers are ex-Googlers. As I said, the Google brand name carries a lot of value, and a lot of our engineers are ex-Googlers. And probably the most impressive statistic is uh, every 1 in 5 of our engineers went to the International Olympiad and won a medal there. And that's if you know anything about the International Olympiad, it's a exam you give in high school, and you know it's the best of the world. So this is literally the best of the world. And it can just go on and on. I mean, there's the guy who made Words with Friends. There's the guy who made Facebook chat heads on your phone. Um, the last headmaster of Yale is our CEO now. Uh, the we have two ex-class presidents of Yale who work there. A guy from Princeton who was the best student of his class. The guy who was the lead infrastructure developer at LinkedIn, an ex-director at Facebook. It's just every single person I've met at Coursera has ceased has not ceased to impress me. Sorry, every single person has been absolutely incredible, and that's why I love Coursera so much. And this is true for a lot of startups actually. Uh, yes, Google is a great brand name. Yes, all your parents and all your friends will recognize it and be happy. But at some point, you have to think about what makes you happy. And and I think personally, these startups working at Coursera has been one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life, and it's absolutely incredible. And so, the next thing I want to talk about is 'cause I get a lot of these questions on Facebook, or people will my parents' friends will come up to me and tell me about their future, or high school kids will tell me about what their future, and I like to club what most of them want to do as the Great Indian Dream. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's not something I made up. This is the Great Indian Dream. Literally almost everybody in the whole country, or everybody's parents at least, want them to do this. Um, they want them to study for the IIT. They want them to do the IIT. Then they want them to do IIM. Then they want them to get a good job abroad. And then they want them to get married. And then this happens again and again and again. And it's so depressing that in such a diverse country like ours, and there's so many things that people can do, and this is what they want to do. It's like either engineer or doctor. You've all heard it before. This is nothing new to you. Um, but I read this article the other day, and it was about how parents are risk averse by nature. And it's an interesting statement. What they're trying to say is parents give you good advice, but parents won't necessarily give you the best advice, because parents care for you. They do care for you, and they want you to do the best that you can. But if you actually think about it, parents will only say something from their perspective. They don't really take into account all the time how you feel about something. It's always, if my son goes to IIT, or my daughter goes to IIT and then IIM and then gets a good job and gets married, I will be happy and their lives will be set. That's what goes on in their mind. If you tell them, Mom, I want to become a photographer, they don't like that, not because they hate photography. They don't like it because your career is not certain, and they like certainty. They don't like risk. And it's interesting to note, because once you digest this fact, you start taking all their advice with a grain of salt. And I think this is something that happened to me at a very early age. I realized that, my parents are not right all the time. They're not, I can't blindly trust them. And that's when I started making my own life decisions. Um, it might come as a surprise to you that my father also wanted me to go to IIT. It took a lot of convincing to tell my dad, Dad, this is not what I want to do. And I want to go abroad because I think the opportunities there are much better than here. And I know that you might have to pay a little more, but this is my dream, and this is kind of my life and not yours. So let's do what I want to do. And in the end, parents, if when your kid is so sure, your parents will listen to you. And I think this is something that you should take into account for the rest of your lives. If you want to do something and you've done your research, your parents might be against it and you might be scared shitless of your parents. And that happens to all of us. But if you just plant the seed in their head and let them know that you know what you're doing, eventually even the strongest of parents will cave. Um, and so we have this great engineering dream. We have all these parental problems, all these things that parents ask us to do. But then the obvious question is, what are our options? And I'll give this slide has a lot of text, and I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm saying. Given your perspective, you guys are all engineers in college, and I've met many people, I don't know whether you fall into this category or not, who are also engineers in India. A lot of my friends are engineers in India, in college, and they have no idea what the possibilities are. They've never done the research of what can I do after this. To them, it's just, oh, everyone around me wants a job that pays well. I should also want a job that pays well. It's a very flock mindset. A lot of my friends will ask me, well, Didi, what are the options that I have? What can I do in my life with my life now that I'm an engineer in college? And there's a degree of things you can do. And I like to list four broad main things that you can do. Um, the first thing, let's just start with other. You can do something completely unrelated to engineering. There's so many examples of this. I cannot recommend any. Uh, I don't know how to advise you on that, but even if you're an engineer, if you hate your life, if you hate what you do, please don't be an engineer because you're not going to help yourself. You might make your parents a little happy for some amount of time, but in the long run, you'll just be bitter. And I know this sounds cliche, but if you really know that you really don't like engineering, just do something else. And there's a ton of things you can do, and it's really hard to do them, but do something else. Um, the second thing is something that I have very controversial, strong feelings against, and that is business. Uh, my dad, so a little background. My dad is a workaholic. He works both at IBM as well as does his own business on the side. And ever since I went to Cornell, I went abroad, his next big idea for me was, Didi, you should do an MBA. And I said, no, I definitely don't want to do an MBA because so last semester and a few semesters ago, I tried it, right? I tried taking business classes. I tried figuring out, what is this business stuff all about? And I realized, I'm a hardcore engineer. I love solving problems. And the study of how to scam people to get money, which is my perception of business, is not something very appealing. Because in all the business classes that I took at a place like Cornell, what I felt was it's all about, how do you make money? How do you make money? How do you make money? And it's not something that appeals to me at all. Um, and if it appeals to you, then do it. I'm not stopping you. I don't want to impose on your uh, big monetary desires in the future, but I wouldn't recommend it. Uh, the next thing is a big topic, right? The next thing is the industry. And it kind of falls in a lot of areas that I can't fully cover. There's so many things as an engineer. And let me be particular to computer science because that's my background. Even in computer science, there's so many things you can do that I don't want to list all of them right now and then tell you the pros and cons of each, but I kind of did that to myself when I was choosing a job. But what I can tell you is, so most people in India will say, you know, either I'll get a job here, I'll make a good salary, or I'll go do my master's abroad, and I'll get a job there, and I'll make a better salary. And that's the thought process. And maybe they say, I want to get a job at a great company. And by great company, like I said before, they mean a company my parents and my family have heard of. And that's not the definition of a great company, because and don't hate me for saying this, but I don't think I would ever work at a place like Microsoft, because most of the teams there don't do much anymore. So, you know, it's about the work you do, not about the company you make. So when you do go into the industry, it is not an easy concept to digest, but just don't do something for the money. It's it's just a bad path to go along. Doing something for money is a bad idea. The industry is also comes with its pros and cons, and I'm still currently myself debating between the industry and research. Um, in the industry, most typically, you don't have to be very smart. Let's be honest, like most of the people in the industry are very average CS people. You will make a good amount of money if you do well. You will have a great life. Usually won't have to really suffer or struggle for anything. You'll probably have a good wife and a good car, a good house. Life will be very nice. Um, but you won't be big. It's very hard to be a big person in the industry. I mean, we all like looking at Satya Nadella and going, wow, this is a great story, and I can be like him. But the odds are stacked against you. It's very, very hard and a very long process to be someone big in the industry. And the other thing is, I personally feel that it's horrible that the industry in the industry you will be working for the same person or for the same place, like for somebody else for the rest of your life. And that's something that is it's hard for me to digest. Like it's just how could I spend my entire life working for somebody else? And the last thing is interesting. The last thing is research. A lot of you had asked me questions about research on email or on the question form, and that's great because most people I know in doing engineering lean towards the industry as opposed to research. Research is interesting. Usually the line of trajectory that you'd go is do a PhD and then work at a research company or be a professor. And it's a very hard thing to do. The reason it's hard is if you look at researchers, if you look at PhD students or professors at different places, or like actually Google them and then read their resume, you will realize that these people are some of the most smart people you have ever met. I'm talking about people who were the best in their high school, went like I don't know, ranked in the top 100 for CS at least, ranked in the top 100 at IIT, went to IIT, gold medalist at IIT, went to Cornell or Stanford, got a 4.0 GPA there, did all these publications. After he was one of the best, PhD student programs are hard. After he struggled through his PhD program, he actually became a professor. And to be a professor after your PhD, you have to be the best of the best of that. So it's just a sequence of hard things. And so in the end, you end up with a really, really smart person. And he's not even famous. Nobody knows about him. Nobody cares about him. He's not rich. And that's something that you'll have to deal with if you want to go into research. And it's hard. And but the on the positive side, it is very fulfilling. Yeah, it's something where you realize that you're making a big impact to society, even though nobody else kind of recognizes it. Uh, and one example I like to use is, uh, when everybody thinks of Apple products, when everybody thinks of an iPad or an iPhone, everyone thinks Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs made the iPhone. Steve Jobs didn't make the iPhone. Apple kind of made the iPhone, but the amount of research that went into all the components of making a phone like that in a time like that is all done by researchers at some university which no one ever talks or hears about. So it's hard. It's something that it's hard to deal with and not getting the fame that you deserve. But those are kind of the main options you have. And if you're an engineer, and I might have left out something. If I have, please feel free to ask me. One big thing I might have left out is doing a startup, um, and I can talk about that a little bit. I just couldn't fit it in the slide. But if any of you are interested in that, I can talk about it in the end. Um, so we're nearing the end of this. There's two more things left. Uh, a lot of you said you wanted to know about education in America, and particularly about my experience there. So I've already talked about it a little bit, and let me just make it clear so everybody understands. Um, so when you talk about education in America, you're probably expecting me to tell you a list of good colleges and good places to go, or how to get in, or things to do. And I can tell you that if you ask me a question in the end. But what I want to really talk to you about is, since I work at Coursera, and the reason I do is because I'm very passionate about education in general. And when I say I'm passionate about education, and this is kind of what my TED Talk was about, I'm really passionate about the way education is changing right now. Because I read a lot of these articles, and so what's happening now is, for the first time in thousands and thousands of years, the whole format of education is starting to undergo a change because of these online courses. It's starting slowly, and I'm sure in a few years we will completely forget the lecture format that used to happen, maybe in a few decades. But in this new paradigm of education, what's interesting is everybody says, "Oh, this is stupid. Like, well, everyone can't learn online. That's just absurd because where is the personal connection and this and that?" And I agree. Where is the personal connection? So this is where the new paradigm comes in. And this is something that Andrew and our CEO and our founder and some other people envisioned, and that we're always talking about this at Coursera and how we play into it. In the new paradigm of education, this is how it's going to work. You're going to go home, you're going to take classes online, learn things. After you learn these things, you go back to class, having learned these things, and then with all your peers and all your very smart professors, you talk about them and you debate them and you discuss them, and then you collaboratively build something using these ideas. Because that's what education is about. Education is not about go back home, go to class, have somebody talk to you for 40 minutes, go back home, remember that for the next rest of the semester, go back to class, regurgitate all of that in your exam, and then forget. That's how we do it now, and it sucks. This is how we want to do it in the future. And we've tried this, and there's a couple of projects that I can show you, and this is actually working, and it's a big deal. But how does this apply to you guys, or any of us? How it does apply is, in my personal experience at Cornell, you'd be very surprised that I never went to any lectures. I go to lectures maybe once or twice a week in the few classes that need attendance, but otherwise I never go to lecture. So, my GPA is fine. I'm doing well in college, mind you. It's just that lectures are not meaningful to me. I can study the same thing at my own pace and do it better than can be taught in the lecture. And then all I really need from the class is the assignments, and I love talking to professors, and I love talking to other TAs or uh, the other students and learn from them and grow. So, and it's not just me alone. I'm not special. A lot of people don't go to lectures, which brings me to an interesting point. Why am I going to Cornell if I don't get anything from the education at Cornell? And to talk about this, there's a few things. The campus is awesome. That's a big thing. Cornell is like a it's like a I don't know, it's like a wonderland. It's a great campus. I love it. It's so conducive to studying and to learning because you don't care about anything else going on in the world. All you care about is the few people who are also studying around you, and it's just a great environment. The next reason is professors. Like I said, in that paradigm, professors are crucial because professors know so much. They have so much knowledge to give, and they waste that knowledge because all professors do is go to class, say something to you that they've said 40 times before to other people, and then go back home. And that's not a good, and they do research on the side, but that's not a good use of their time when they can be imparting all this great knowledge they've picked up by discussing these subjects with you interactively. Um, and then, obviously, and this is an unfortunate way that society works, and it'll change in the future, the brand name of a college is big. That's why I go to Cornell and not some other college, because it has a big brand name. It matters when I apply to some company. They actually look at my resume. Um, and also the peers. The peers, when you go to an institution where everybody is smart, like in NIT, I'm sure everybody is so, so smart. You develop, just like John Hopcroft said, you develop from the environment around you. And at Cornell, I've had so many smart people around me, and I think that's been a key role, played a key role in my own development and in the side projects I do. And the last kind of thing is there's so much freedom, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but here, I'll talk a bit more about this here. This is, sorry, I can't design the best of slides. This is Three Idiots, people. Um, so in India, this is just I want to highlight the differences between how things work in India and how things work abroad to kind of give you a sense of why everyone is so excited about going abroad. Why is education in America such a big deal? And it's not because it necessarily has smarter people. That has nothing to do with it. But so for an Indian student, typically you'll go abroad to do your masters. Um, and when they do go abroad to do their masters, they tend to stay in their comfort zone. They'll always hang around with other Indians. They'll cook their Indian food, and this is great. I have no problems in cooking Indian food. I love cooking Indian food and hanging around with Indian people. But the flip side is, you know, and I don't expect a lot of engineers to understand this, and because it's something that I took a long time to understand. But there's so much that I developed by going out of my comfort zone. Not hanging out with Indians, not hanging out with people I was comfortable with, hanging out with, gay people, hanging out with blonde girls, hanging out with people who are completely different from me in every way. And this has nothing to do with computer science, but it makes a huge difference in your individual personality because you grow when you are with people who are different from you, who think differently, who look differently, who have different religious affiliation. It's just so amazing to be in that environment and to learn about these people that you really grow as a person. And I think that's the most important thing in the world. So I encourage, and this is the worst thing about India, because yes, we're very diverse and we have a lot of people, but we have a lot in common as well. And I don't think we get that same exposure in India that you get abroad. And moving on, and another big thing is, you know, you're so grade oriented. Indian students are always so grade oriented, whereas me. in my undergrad, yeah, sure, I cared about my GPA, but I never really, I knew that if I got a bad GPA, it would never affect my job, my career. In India, you can't even say that. Um, and so the other things are, you know, you're always, like I said, your parents have brought you up, have brought me up with this mindset that it's always about going to a big company. It's about the brand. It's about making money, and your parents want you to settle down with a wife from and be from a good college and make a lot of money. That's their dream, but that's not your dream. That should not be your dream. Your dream should be, and I think I've somewhat, and my peers at Cornell also think like this, is to always keep achieving and learning and doing new things. Every time, like if I had stopped, if I if I was very satisfied after interning at Google, I would have just stayed there. Wouldn't be able to grow past it. Um, so I always encourage anybody who I talk to it's not about you never should never be satisfied with yourself. Always try to grow and see what options are better and what you can do that is better from what you do now. And the biggest thing, and this is something we were told at Coursera all the time, and it's something that really, really is the closest thing to my heart. Never stop learning. All of us, a lot of people at least, in India, abroad, everywhere, have this mindset that I will go to college, I will get a job. When I get a job, I will stop to learn. I will just work, 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 and make money and be happy. That's not that's not what life is to me. I think that even after you graduate, you should always be learning, whether it be from the newspaper, whether it be from reading articles about different things, whether it be from reading books, whether it be in engineering or non-engineering. I personally think it's really, really important to know about a wide range of things. Recently, I've read books on economics and capitalism and whatnot, and it's philosophy, and it's just so fascinating. It's so fascinating, and it builds you as an individual again. Um, so just something to keep in mind. So uh, the last thing I want to talk about, and I know many of you are, uh, as per your responses on the form, I felt like a lot of you are interested in, software engineering, career, this, that, important stuff. Um, but I want to talk to you about something that's, I think, more important, and some of you did express interest in this, so hear me out, if nothing else. And it's just a general theory of like life, my philosophy, and what guides and motivates everything I do. And you might think when I tell you this that, oh my God, what an intellectual, what a weird guy who thinks about things like this. And I think that this is the most important part about life. If you don't know what the philosophy that governs every decision that you make, you can't make a decision because you don't know what you're trying to achieve. And it's kind of like a CS problem or any kind of engineering problem. You want to optimize your life for something. How do you want to optimize it for? And I think that the root of any decision that you make is always one thing for everybody. It's one thing only, and that is happiness. Everything you do is to be happy. There are things that make certain people happy, and that's a personal thing. And there are things that differs from person to person, and that's something you have to figure out. What makes me happy? How can I go there? And it's interesting, and everyone has their own way of saying this. But as you know, I also a few years ago I have not really thought this through. So when I started thinking about this, I thought, what makes me happy? Well, when other people say good things about me, that makes me happy. And I lived life pretty okay. like that. But then I realized other people are saying bad things about me sometimes when I'm pretty happy, and some people say good things about me when I don't really care about it. So then I realized that's not what makes me happy. What really, really makes me happy is when I personally, from the inside, do something and gain something from that. And it's it's a big realization in anybody's life. And as I sort of realized that, personally, things like just achieving more than I've achieved before, learning new things, knowing about new things, developing myself as a person, going to the gym, maybe working out, uh, having a love life, that makes me happy. Having a stable love life, that makes me happy. And I work on all these things in my life all the time. But often what happens is, you know, this is what happened to me. This is a big deal. What happens is when you do something that makes you happy, you become very arrogant about it. And this leads me to one of this kind of theory about how about life in general is why do we always have this self-importance, right? When you have this big dream and you do it, all of a sudden you feel, oh my God, I'm so awesome. I did this big thing. But really, listen to this theory. The theory that I'm telling you is, what if I were to tell you that everything that you've ever done and everything that you ever will do is completely and completely based on luck? Most of you would say, Didi, you're crazy. That's just not true. And I would tell myself this if I didn't hear myself out. But hear me out. I'm not some crazy religious person. I'm not. But this will make sense to you. Um, the biggest argument against this is, of course, well, I thought that I achieved something because I worked hard. What about that? And here's what happens. Let's say I have an exam tomorrow and I have to study for it today. I will now decide to A, should I study? Or B, should I not? And based on all of my past experiences and everything that I've learned from my parents, from my childhood, all of those things is what governs what decision I make. And if all of those things have made me a studious person up to this point, I'll probably say, yes, I should study. And I make that decision to study. And that is hard work. But what I'm saying is every decision you make is made by your mind, and your mind is built off of influences all the time. Your mind is nothing but an aggregation of influences, some that change, or some that can change, and some that don't change. So if you see somebody from a poor family, usually a very, very poor family, and you'll see that usually they're not inclined, even if they go to school, they're not inclined to study as much. And then you see someone from a very rich family and or from a very academic family, and you see that they're more inclined to go to school. And the first thing people say is, it's genetics. He's smarter, he's not, or whatever. But if you really think about it, and I can go through infinite examples, and I haven't found a case that disproves this, it's always about the interactions that you have that change your mind. Because his parents were academic, they brought that over to him. That's what influenced his decisions. When he was 3, he wanted to study because he wanted to make his parents happy, and so he did. And everything works like that. Why do some students become spoiled and become druggies? Because one of their friends went and told them, we should try this. And he trusted that friend because of their past experiences, and so he tried it. And what I'm trying to say is this is out of your control. Who you meet, who influences you, who changes your mind is completely random. And think about this in your own perspective. Whether or not you get into a certain college, even more random. Some random guy is sitting looking at your admissions paper and deciding. Or if you give an exam, some random questions are being set which may or may not reflect your knowledge of a subject. If you look at anything in the world, it's all just luck. And how can you change this? This is a horrible realization to feel, because then you sort of feel like, can I even change this in any way? And the thing is, you can, because even as a result of something like me giving you this talk, this is my mind influencing your mind to change, and maybe you will make decisions that will help you better in the future. And maybe you can do the same for other people. It's something I call, well, I don't call it. It's something called the butterfly effect. And that effect is, if you look at geniuses, right? Somebody who's exceptionally good, say at computer science. What I might theorize is that as a child, he had no toys to play with except his computer. Therefore, he went to his computer and he started playing with it, and he was very interested. And then the internet came on, and then he decided to click on the first link in Google that he wanted to click on, and it goes to a programming language site. And so he decides to read it, and then he decides to read it some more because it's interesting. And in the future, because of this random incident, it turns out that he gets very interested in this, and then he decides to learn more about it. And before you know it, he's a genius. So that's something called the butterfly effect, when certain small things in your past has an unknown big effect on your future. And I'll just give you one more example. This is one I spoke about at the TED Talk as well. If you give a subjective exam, right? If you give an exam where you have to write answers to questions, it goes to your teacher. Let's say your teacher had a bad day this morning and it rained and he didn't get his umbrella because of X and Y and a whole bunch of reasons. But he didn't get his umbrella. He got into work. He was very pissed off. He saw your paper. He was angry. He was frustrated. He decided to give you low marks. And that can change your life. That's the butterfly effect. And I think that's something that really helps me live my life, because it helps me realize that things are unfair and things are not in your hands almost all the time. And there are little things that you can do to change it, to try to change it, but it's hard. So that's actually all I have to talk about. And so last point was, this also helps me realize that no matter what you do, I think a very important part of it is to remain humble and realize that tomorrow something could happen to you, to your family, or to anything, and that more importantly, that everything is luck. And so don't get ahead of yourself, and staying humble is very important to being a happy and good human being. And that's about it. That's it. So that's all I have for my talk. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them to me.
Yeah, we'll be inviting questions in a sec. Anyway, if anyone has questions, they can kindly walk down here. Yes, I think we'll bring this engagement to a closure right now.
Okay.
So thank you very much, and thanks for accepting the invitation to speak at our college.
No
we would definitely like to see more of you, perhaps in person someday, not too far away.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Thank you again. Thanks for your